admit this and get it rolling. All right. Um, okay. All right, everybody, let's get rolling. Brittany's here from Ad Week magazine. I met her on LinkedIn when she had a really outstanding insights into one of the Super Bowl ads, and the guy who was the president of the company had to go underneath comments and give his points of view, which made me laugh. And so she's going to give her ideas and her thoughts on some ads or brands that are good, some brands that aren't so good, and why. And there'll be a chance for questions at the end. So let me stop talking and welcome Brittany to take over from here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Nice to see you all. Yeah, so I work at Adweek. If you don't know, Adweek is a publication that covers the advertising, marketing, and media industries. It's a good place to read if you don't already know it, just to get some inspiration or see what other brands are doing. In my job, I focus on brands in the creative side and like the kind of work they're putting out, the kind of campaigns and branding. So I just thought I would take you through a few examples of brands and campaigns that I liked recently and a few that I didn't. And it might be helpful if you're thinking of going into the industry to hear from a journalist who covers it and has been covering it for a long time, and kind of my perspective as like a little bit of an outsider. Um, and I apologize that my deck is so basic. I'm not a designer, but I have a few images just to accompany them. Um, so the first one is J.C. Penney. So J.C. Penney was my mom's favorite shop when I was growing up. So I very much thought of it as kind of like a older retailer that wasn't cool. But recently, they've been trying to have a bit of a comeback. So they have a new CMO who started last year, and they introduced this platform called Yes, JCPenney. And it's supposed to be a little bit ironic, like as if it's the answer to a question, like, did you get that at JCPenney? And they're like, yeah, we got it at JCPenney. So, like, flipping those um, misconceptions about the brand being kind of outdated and not very cool or stylish. So what I like about what they've been doing is they've been kind of tapping into these like frustrations in culture around elitism. And a recent example is this one that's pictured on the screen it was called the Other Paris Runway. And if you follow fashion news, like at the recent fashion weeks in Paris and Milan, you saw billionaires like Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos sitting in the front row, and there was some discussion of like, oh, is fashion has become so elite and out of touch for the everyday person. So JCPenney had this runway show in the other Paris in Texas, which I didn't know was a place. And they kind of like flipped all of these elite tropes about fashion on its head. So everyone who attended was a real local resident. All the models were real people from Paris, Texas. And the total cost of all the outfits was like a little over $8,000, which is less than probably a single item you could buy at Paris Fashion Week. And then the other thing was that they displayed all the prices on screen. So everything, they wanted to be accessible to people. Everyone had a backstage pass to the after party, and they showcased body diversity, which is, as you know, not a thing in fashion. So the CMO told me that they're trying to kind of tap into these like elite frustrations that people have. And this followed something they did last summer called the Other Venice Wedding, which was a similar theme. Like they threw a wedding for a real couple that only cost $10,000, and it was supposed to be a contrast to Jeff Bezos's wedding in Venice. Um, so yeah, so I like what they've been doing there, and they're like I said, they're tapping into like a cultural insight, but they're allowed to do it because they're a brand that has something to say and can kind of back up that idea with real proof. Another example I liked recently was from Anthropic, and I don't know if any of you use Claude, their AI chatbot. They ran their first Super Bowl ad in the recent Super Bowl. And it was interesting because the timing was kind of perfect because their rival, OpenAI, announced like the week before that they were rolling out ads on ChatGPT. And so Anthropic's ads, I think there were three in total. They were kind of making fun of the idea of if you were on a chatbot asking it questions about like how to cook or how to, how to work out or what to do about your relationship. And then an ad interrupted that experience. And whether you believe that Anthropic is never going to roll out ads or not, like they probably will at some point, it was effective because it was funny and it also got their rivals to respond publicly. So OpenAI's CEO and CMO both came out and made statements against it and kind of made their case for why they do have ads and like why they think Anthropic is wrong. And I thought that was great because as a brand, if you can get your competition to pay attention and obviously like upset them, then that's exactly kind of what you want to do in marketing. So that was a really interesting feud that played out during the Super Bowl, these rival AI companies having a public dialogue. And it's up to the consumer, what they take from it. The next example is Gap. So, do you guys remember their their Gap ads are kind of famous from like the 90s and early 2000s. They always had great choreography, a recognizable star, and really good music. And then like a lot of mall brands, kind of similar to J.C. Penney, they started to lose sales and lose store traffic and over the years, they became more of like a dusty brand. And recently, they've also been in the middle of a comeback. And the way they've done this is to kind of bring back something that already worked for them. So they have their dance ads, probably every season they release a new one. And what's different about it is that they're using stars who are more likely to appeal to Gen Z. So they've been really smart about like finding these up and coming talent who do appeal to a younger generation. They're also, so the example I put on the screen is Cat's Eye. I'm sure some of you know them. And this was their spring campaign last year. And, the formula is pretty simple. It's like a musician or a star who's dancing and they're wearing the Gap clothes. There's always a good, soundtrack. But this particular example like went really viral when it came out last year. And I also liked the contrast between Gap and about a week or two before American Eagle released its now infamous Sydney Sweeney campaign. I don't know if you guys saw that when it came out. And the Sydney Sweeney campaign was like really criticized for, I think, these kind of outdated tropes like playing to the male gaze. And Gap was really like a beautiful celebration of diversity and like other cultures and like not the same like tropes that advertising is often criticized for. So yeah, they've been doing great stuff. Like I would check out the ads that they've released recently. They just released one last week with Young Miko, the Puerto Rican rapper. And what's also interesting about Gap is they recently hired their first chief entertainment officer, and they're opening an office in LA on Sunset Boulevard, and they're making this big push into making like original entertainment. So it'll be really interesting to see kind of where they go next with that. So now on to things that I don't like. So this was the Liquid Death Super Bowl ad that we met on LinkedIn about. So Liquid Death kind of used to be known as this challenger disruptor brand. They're the canned sparkling water, and they are known for doing these ads that are kind of like off the wall, a little bit outrageous. Like they just did this collaboration with Spotify where you can buy a Bluetooth speaker and like have make a playlist for the afterlife. And they often do stuff like that where it's like a little bit edgy or, you know, um, like maybe, not mainstream humor that most brands would shy away from. But the reason I didn't like their Super Bowl ad is that formula just started to feel like pretty tired. And I think kind of the trap of you become like the one that everyone mimics because you're breaking the rules. But then when everyone is doing that, you kind of have to reinvent yourself again. And I thought this ad was a little weak in the humor and the idea. And so I think it's time for them to shake it up again, like come up with something new that other people want to mimic. Um, not everyone agreed with me. The CEO of Liquid Death, like Tom said, like left a comment on LinkedIn and really was mad about this. But, I think like every brand has to continuously reinvent themselves. And even brands like Gap, who have perfected a formula that is working for their business, they're finding ways to keep it fresh and like the talent that they use, or just having an eye on the future while still like embracing the nostalgia aspect. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Liquid Death does next. And they're always like growing and launching new products. So, we'll see. The next example, also a Super Bowl ad, is Svedka. This is the vodka brand, and this was their first ever Super Bowl ad. And what was interesting about it was they brought back their mascot, the Fembot, um, who was kind of a controversial mascot back in, I think it was the early 2000s, maybe even before. And the Fembot was controversial because she or it like kind of embodied these like this like a certain body type that just like American Eagle or certain brands are being criticized for, catering to the male gaze. Like it was said that Svedka was doing something similar. So it was kind of an odd choice that they brought back a mascot that basically looked the same as before. But also, they made a big thing about how they used AI to make this ad. And I think this is a really interesting debate that's playing out like in the marketing industry right now. A lot of brands and agencies are using AI and they're using it as a tool, like mostly in the production process and possibly in other ways as well. But I think when brands like make AI the whole story, it's often fallen flat. So here with Svedka, like their whole pitch was, look, we made an ad with AI, but there was no real narrative behind it. Like this ad was kind of universally disliked and mocked because it was very cringe and like if you watch it, the fembot and this is the brobot, her sidekick, like it's just a very cringe ad. So I think that's a problem when a brand becomes like too infatuated with the technology and not the real craft and the story behind it. Another example of a brand that did this was Coca-Cola with the Christmas ad. That was kind of, I don't know how much that like penetrated outside the ad industry, but it was controversial that they remade their classic Christmas is coming ad with the trucks with AI. But if you see it, it just looks very fake. And everyone was like, why did you ruin a classic? So I think like brands are getting more sophisticated in how they use AI and they're weaving it into the production process rather than making it the whole story. But this is something that's definitely developing really quickly. So it'll be interesting to see how other brands continue to move it forward. And then my last example, and I'd actually be interested to know like what you guys think of this one. So this is Poppi, the soda brand, and they also made their Super Bowl debut. They were recently acquired by Pepsi. And this ad was tied to the Charlie XCX movie, The Moment. I think where this didn't work though was that I feel like you'd only appreciate this ad if one, you knew who Charlie XCX was, which I recently learned not everyone does. Like, and also if you saw the movie and you got like, it was almost like an inside joke for people who were fans of hers and the movie and her music. But I think the vast majority of people watching the Super Bowl who were tuning in, it they may not have really got it. And so I think that's a tricky thing for brands who are more like challenger, up and coming. They want to speak to their target audience, but they've spent $7 million to advertise during the Super Bowl, and the majority of people don't get it. So, and I also felt that the video was, I mean, they kept saying vibes in the ad. So it was all about the vibes, and there wasn't really a strong narrative or idea behind it. So yeah, those are my examples.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Brittany. Now, anybody have any questions? This meeting's gonna end by 1 o'clock. So here's your chance. You can take yourself off mute or put a question in the box. Here is someone who's looking at brands and branding from a journalist point of view. So if you have any questions or thoughts, you could
Yeah,
ask now.
I have a question about just like the Poppy ad tying into different like brands we've looked at. Do you think that like Poppy was just relying too much on Charlie XCX and like her like positioning as a person? Because we talk about Gap, but they have like their iconic like Gap denim that they like continuously drop. So it's kind of letting like the people they go after, it's letting like the talent they have work with their product when Poppy was just like relying on it. And it's also like I feel like it was targeting maybe a base that they already have too much
Hmm.
because like I don't really see like guys walking around with like Poppy cans a lot. Like it tends to be a drink I see more with like girls and women. So it's just something like, do you think they were relying too much on talent?
Yeah, I think that's a good observation. I also recently learned that the guy who directed the moment also directed the Poppy ad. So I think they maybe got swept up in that, like, oh, we're doing this talent partnership, and Charlie XCX probably does appeal to Poppy's target audience. But that's a big problem with Super Bowl ads generally, is if you watch them, like a lot of them have so many celebrities in them, but you a lot of times you're like, why are they even there? Like they have no connection to the brand or the story that they're trying to tell. So I do think that's what happened here. You may disagree with me, but some people may have loved it just because they love Charlie XCX. But I think that's a good shout as well. Like the people who already drink Poppy might also already like Charlie XCX. What about those who they're trying to reach who've never tried Poppy? Like presumably that's why they spent so much money on a Super Bowl ad.
Hannah, I see your hand up. You can take yourself off mute and ask your question.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about how I've heard that like it's really easy for marketers to get really caught up in like habits and things that they do regularly and be blindsided. Is there a time, or could you share like a time that that happened in your career and what you learned from it, if you
Where
have one?
where where like getting caught up in a habit.
Like maybe where you didn't like realize something, like you were talking about the Poppy ad and how they were so caught up in the like the movie that they were doing and they weren't really seeing the full picture. I know it's hard to like see the full picture sometimes when you're doing a lot of the same things over and over and they're working and are you
Mhm.
following?
Yeah, I mean, tell me if this doesn't answer your question. Like as a journalist and an editor, like we have to like stay in tune with what readers want to read about and like create content for them. Otherwise, we're failing. So I think like that's definitely happened to me and my colleagues at various points. Like um, either publishing something that just doesn't work, like no one reads it, or you publish something that surprises you and a lot of people do read it. So it's kind of a continuous job to like stay up to date with what people are interested in and testing it as well, I guess. Like now that we have data, we can see what people are interested in and what they're reading. And so it's probably similar for brands, like they could get caught up in these in data or like not looking at the data. Actually, I just thought of another example that was interesting, like just because I said data, um, about brands almost becoming like too obsessed with it. And you know, Elf Beauty, the makeup brand, they ran a campaign, I think it was last year with a comedian. I'm forgetting his name, but they found that like in the data, he appealed to their target audience of like Gen Z girls mostly. But then somehow they missed that he had in his Netflix special like made a joke about domestic abuse. And so they ended up like pissing off their core audience and they got all this backlash from people who were like, why did you use this guy in an ad? So I think like data can help us and it can inform us, you know, in what like about what's working, but also you can't become too obsessed with it.
That makes a lot
And
of sense. Thank you.
thank you.
Matt Rife, yeah, that was his name.
And then we have a question on companies that are losing brand share. Have you seen any campaigns that have been effective in getting them back on top? You know,
Mm.
any campaign that stood out for a company that, as you pointed out with like Gap and J.C. Penney, any other ones come to mind?
Um, Well, just to the question of if you make a mistake, like what do you do? I mean, Elf, I thought also like they made that mistake, but then they handled it well because they apologized right away, and course corrected. And I think like audiences now, they're so, I mean, you've heard this before, like they're so savvy about like brands and they have opinions and they'll voice them on social media. So the best thing a brand can do is just to own up to it and learn from it and then move forward. In terms of like brands making a comeback, I mean, Gap and JC Penney come to mind. Um, I don't know. I think like that's, yeah, a lot of the retailers are up and down. Like another interesting one is UGG. I just thought of them because it's, you know, all the spring fashion campaigns are coming out. Like UGG has had so many ups and downs of they were once on Oprah's list of favorite things, like back in the, I don't know if that was the early 2000s, they were the shoe. And then now they're kind of back again. And I think they are another good example of a brand that's just like continuously reinventing and staying fresh. Fashion and retail brands really have to do that the most, but they're kind of a good case study.
All right. Well, let's do one more question. As far as I'm just curious, Brittany, how did you get involved covering brands as a journalist? How did that come about? You always interested in marketing and stuff?
Kind of by accident. I went to journalism school, and then when I left and I moved to New York, I got a job at a company called Haymarket Media, which is publishes like a lot of trade magazines, and one of them was PR Week, which covers more like PR communications. And then from there, I moved to their London office and worked for a campaign magazine, which covers advertising. So kind of just like followed the opportunities. And it is really interesting because marketing touches on everything. Every kind of brand has to do it. And it's so closely tied to culture. So, and it's often like the brands that do well or that mess up, like they are often like tapping into real like audience feeling and opinions. So it's definitely interesting to observe. It's always changing.
Well, we want to thank you for coming today and sharing uh, these thoughts with our students. We promise to be done before one, so let's say thank you, everybody, as you check out of here. By all means, follow Brittany on LinkedIn. I'm still saying thank you in the boxes. And again, this was great. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. And again, Brittany, thank you for doing this. It was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for
Thank
having me.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank
you.
you.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.